It's an election year, and once again, refugees and asylum seekers are hot political issues. Here with me today is Associate Professor Jane McAdam from the Faculty of Law. Jane, you've been quite outspoken recently about these subjects, these topics. What are some of the misconceptions that are in debate at the moment as you see them?
Well, first and foremost is the idea that boat people are queue jumpers. These are people who we haven't invited here, and therefore they are taking the places of refugees who've been waiting in camps in an orderly manner to be resettled. That's one of the biggest myths, because it suggests that refugee camps are systematic, orderly places where you come in with your number, like going to the delicatessen at the supermarket and you've got your number, and when your number comes up you get resettled. It doesn't happen like that at all. People, if they can even flee to a refugee camp, and sometimes there isn't one for them to go to, or the journey is so dangerous that they can't get to it. But once they are there, they have to have their claim assessed, and then each year the UNHCR officers there will be asked basically for a list of people who are awaiting resettlement. That list is then considered by the Immigration Department, and the Immigration Department has certain ethnic composition of people they may like, or what nationality is a priority for resettlement at any particular time. They may wish to resettle particularly vulnerable people, but that requires those people to even be brought to the attention of the resettlement officers, and people have often said the most vulnerable people in refugee camps often don't have spokespeople for them to even bring them to the attention of the resettlement officers. So resettlement is somewhat of a lottery, and there are many millions of people who have been living for at least 5 years or more in a refugee camp with no prospect of resettlement or any other durable solution forthcoming. Another myth, of course, is that asylum seekers are terrorists. Now, fortunately, that's dropped off the political agenda a little bit at the moment, but it was a myth that John Howard used to talk up a lot. There's no link that's been demonstrated between 9/11, for example, and refugees. None of the people involved in 9/11 had ever sought asylum. And quite frankly, why would you? Seeking asylum is one of the most one of the processes that requires the most documentation, the most information to be put before the government. There are other ways you could get into a country without drawing quite so much attention to yourself. There are other myths too, of course, in relation to the numbers. The numbers are completely overblown, I think, in people's minds, and that's a perception that's fueled by the sensational comments that we hear our politicians and some of the radio shock jocks making as well.
And another myth seems to be that a lot of asylum seekers are in fact economic migrants. But who are the people who seek asylum in your experience?
Well, the definition of a refugee is someone with a well-founded fear of persecution based on a particular reason like race or religion or nationality or so on. So these are people who need to get out of their country because their lives or safety are at risk. They are the people who tend to come by boat often feel that they have absolutely nothing to lose. I mean, they are so desperate, they will often pool their resources with other family or community members to try and get themselves passage on a boat to get out of the situation that they are in. Many people will also say that they want to be able to offer their children a future, and they don't simply mean because I'd like them to get a good job, but because they actually want them to have a life, and a life a life lived in dignity as well. If you look at some of the camp situations, or also the urban refugee situations that we have in countries like Indonesia, with people living in urban centres, some of the urban refugees are in even more vulnerable positions than the refugees in camps, because at least in a camp there is some semblance of infrastructure. You are, and actually some real infrastructure too. At least you are getting some food, you are getting basic shelter provided, basic medical care. It's certainly not a place I'd like to be for very long, but those things at least are guaranteed. If you are living in a city as a refugee, you may be treated as like any other person who's there without documents. And so in Malaysia, for example, refugees are often rounded up along with other people without documentation, put in jail. There have been documented cases of whippings and other forms of cruel and inhuman treatment. And these are people exercising their right under international human rights law to seek asylum.
So there isn't an orderly system for these kind of asylum seekers or refugees that, that they're trying to circumvent, which is another myth.
That's right. And furthermore, it's not as though you can just turn up to an Australian consulate and say, I'd like a protection visa, please. I mean, that doesn't exist. So the only way out is, you know, if you are a refugee, by definition, you have to flee your country. And the Refugee Convention too, showing how, you know, aware the drafters were of the predicament of refugees, actually has an exemption. It says that if you arrive without documents, then you can't be penalised because of that, precisely because the nature of flight and the nature of persecution is such that you may leave in a great hurry, and or because you're being persecuted, you can't turn to your government and say, I'd like a passport, please, because I want to leave, or in some countries, you know, I'd like an exit visa because I want to go. And that's also why Tony Abbott's recent announcement that people who arrived on false documents would not have their claims even processed is again a fundamental breach of the Refugee Convention.
I mean, it's obviously a very complicated issue. What's your feeling? Is it possible to have a properly informed public debate about these things, or is it just too complicated for most people?
I think some of it is very complicated, but I think there are some fairly basic issues that could be highlighted in a way that would dispel some of the fear that allegedly exists in the community. And that's where I think you need real political leadership. Whether we can have that in Australia at the moment, I don't know. I mean, I'm not terribly hopeful, having seen the advertisements that are already running for the election campaign, where the message is put in such blunt terms that no wonder we haven't got the space there to have a proper and informed debate. But I would like to be optimistic and hope that at some point in the future we can.
Okay, well, it's not an issue I think that's going to go away.
No.
Okay. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.